Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is the first workshop in a series of 13 workshops that we hope will allow maximum participation and contribution to the creation of Vision 2030. This is a project that we hope will bring together much of the cancer community, and we want to address the challenges that Australian cancer patients and their families will face over the coming decade.
Spencer. I'm a professor of haematology at the Alfred Hospital. I have a particular interest in multiple myeloma. I run the myeloma research program there.
I'm Tiffany Bortwood. I run the national genomic research collaborative called Australian Genomics. Australian Genomics it brings together clinicians and researchers and patients and diagnostic laboratories from around Australia, and all these different organisations and investigators are dedicated to seeing genomics applied in clinical practice in Australia.
Hello, I'm Amanda Ruth. I'm the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at Rare Cancers Australia. I'm heavily involved in the National Oncology Alliance and the author of Vision 2030.
Hi, I'm Jelena. I'm a mom of 3 young boys, and my youngest son, Marco, was diagnosed with cancer in neuroblastoma when he was only 16 months old. Marco first had surgery to remove the tumor, and following that, unfortunately, his cancer came back, so he had to have chemotherapy, stem cell transplant, radiation therapy, immunotherapy, and currently we are participating in a clinical trial in the US.
Vision 2030 is a stakeholder collaboration of 1,200 attendees and over 400 members of the National Oncology Alliance that have come together to look to the future, to plan ahead, to pave the way for emerging new technologies and treatments for cancer patients to optimise outcomes.
We look forward to the cancer community coming together and launching the Vision 2030 Australian Cancer Futures Framework.
Welcome everyone to this year's CanForum, where we'll be hearing from some of the brightest minds in the cancer community and coming together to shape the future of cancer care in Australia. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Sophie Scott. I've been the medical reporter at ABC for more years than I like to think about. One of my greatest passions is reporting on health issues to create awareness, affect change and help as many Australians as possible. And I've hosted a number of Rare Cancer Australia forums. I'm very grateful to Rare Cancers Australia, the Minderoo Foundation and the National Oncology Alliance for inviting me back again to MC this morning's landmark event, launching the Vision 2030 for cancer care in Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here today. I'd like to acknowledge those of us online and in the room with me now who've been touched by cancer. Conversations about cancer can be difficult, so if at any stage you feel you need to step aside, mute or leave the event, please feel free to do so. Our event will run until 12:45 with a short break in between. Today is not about how things are now, but rather how things can be if we embrace new science and emerging cancer technologies. Today is about coming together and planning for the future. Today is about saving lives, potentially tens of thousands of lives of those Australians living with cancer over the next decade. With most of us attending online, it might feel awkward and difficult to engage, but I want to make it clear up front. We want to hear from you throughout the day. Cancer touches nearly every Australian, so if we do this right, we must all be involved. You'll be on mute, but we would love your questions during the day for the panel discussion. Please enter them in the chat section on your screen, and if you're following the conversation online, please use the hashtag #ChangingCancerCare. If you're on Twitter, the Rare Cancers handle is Rare Cancers, and my Twitter and Instagram is Sophie Scott 2. I'd now like to welcome the Honourable Greg Hunt, Federal Minister for Health, who's joining us from Canberra. I know from previous Rare Cancers events that Greg's a big supporter of rare cancers and Richard and Kate's vision for equal access to care for all cancer patients. Please welcome Greg.
Look, thanks very much to Sophie, to Richard and Kate Vines, to Steve Burrell from Minderoo, to David Thomas from the Garvin and Enrico Correa for all of his work, but to the entire rare cancers and cancer community. And Sophie, I think you summed it up very well with both the focus on Indigenous Australians and the need to make sure there was equity of outcome in an area where there isn't. But then more broadly, that the evolution of medical technology and the distribution of access to new and emerging diagnostics, techniques, therapies, and medicines has the potential to save and protect thousands and indeed tens of thousands of lives in Australia over the course of the coming decade. And so I really want to welcome everybody here today for the launch of the Vision 2030 National Oncology Alliance and Rare Cancers Australia's amazing and extraordinary piece of work. Now, to put all of this in context, this, of course, has been the hardest and most challenging of years globally. We've been struck by a pandemic, an infectious disease, something the likes of which we haven't seen for 100 years, and I'd say the world hasn't faced a challenge like this since 1945. So against that background, the world has been intensely focused on health and the human outcomes. But at the same time, we can never lose sight of the fundamental underlying challenges that exist for health and well-being right across Australia. We know that in terms of cancer, in any one year, perhaps 145,000 people will be diagnosed, and sadly, we're expecting 48,000 lives to be lost in 2020. And that in a year where we've obviously been focused on the massive potential loss, and there has been tragedy in Australia, but we know we've probably saved, on the advice of the Medical Journal of Australia, at least 16,000 lives with our national response to COVID-19. But that's what we want to do every year in relation to cancer. The transformation that we can make is real and profound and will affect hundreds of thousands of families in terms of the better outcomes, the better diagnoses and the better prognoses over the course of the period between now and 2030 if we continue to improve on what we're already doing. We know in particular for rare cancers that for 2015, for example, there were 43,000 diagnoses in rare and less common cancers and very sadly, 22,000 lives lost. So the fatality rate, the loss of lives, is proportionately greater amongst those that are diagnosed with the rare cancers. And against that, this further emphasises the importance of giving an express focus to the diagnosis, the treatment, and the potential for cures for the different rare and less common cancers around Australia. And the good news, of course, is that at 69% survival rate, we have the equal highest survival rate for cancer of any country in the world. What an achievement of any country in the world. And that is decades and decades of research, hospital care, PBS access, breakthrough new therapies and treatments that are coming through literally as we speak. But going forwards from here, what we have to look at then is what our response is. And so where are we at? In terms of research, we know that our cancer investment through the NHMRC over the course of more than a decade has been more than $1 billion. But it's not that. It's the forward-looking element that's immensely important, and that will continue. Specifically, in working with Richard and Kate Vines, who are, I think, extraordinary Australians, we've helped build a $614 million rare cancers, rare diseases clinical trials program as a flagship within the Medical Research Future Fund. It both explains the Medical Research Future Fund to the Australian public, but much more importantly, it delivers outcomes in terms of new trials, new medicines, lives saved and lives improved or extended. So far, over $71 million has been allocated right across this program, and $43 million through 29 different projects for rare cancers. And whether that's in terms of neuroblastomas or medulloblastomas, whether that's in terms of pancreatic or other cancers, we know that if there's one life saved, well, that will have been enough, but there will be many lives saved through the trials. And as a consequence of the trials, this will hopefully lead to lives being saved, not just in Australia, but around the world on a grand and significant scale. Equally, under the Medical Research Future Fund, we have not just the patient focus, but we have the missions. And the very first mission that we established, and it was again in the same way that Richard and Kate have done this, very much driven by a passionate group of family advocates led by Dustin Perry, the father of a beautiful young girl, Chloe, who lost her battle with brain cancer. And I met both Dustin and Chloe early in my time in the portfolio. We established the Australian Brain Cancer Mission and made it a collaborative mission under the Medical Research Future Fund, the first of 8 missions. And it now has $133 million. We've had trials being conducted across a range of different activities. For example, DIPG, which we know has such a catastrophic impact when diagnosed because of its almost absolute fatality rate. But we have to fight these things. That's what we're doing. And then that takes me to what we've done with regards to genomics. So whilst we have created the Rare Cancers, Rare Diseases program, we've also created a genomics mission, which is not exclusively confined to cancer, but it helps unlock the keys to cancer. A 10-year mission, $500 million. At its heart is, in particular, the work on genomic sequencing, genomic profiling, being able to look at an individual's own tumour DNA to understand the nature of it. And that leads into 2 other specific projects, the Zero Childhood Cancer Program with over $54 million of Commonwealth funding, and the funding from the Minderoo Foundation, which I want to acknowledge and recognise and appreciate and say, Steve, to you and everybody associated with Minderoo, thank you. What this is about is very simple, giving every child in Australia who's diagnosed with cancer the opportunity, if the clinicians deem it appropriate, that they can have the DNA sequencing to try to unlock tailored, personal, precision medicine. And the results we've seen in the early stages have been deeply heartening, with therapies and treatments in well over half the cases recognised and with significant improvements. And that is saving the lives of young children and opening the door to save many more lives over the course of the next decade. And then, every month I'm in the fortunate position of being able to bring new medicines onto the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. And these medicines will provide treatments. It could be for pancreatic cancer. It could be for NETs. It could be for all sorts of different cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, different branches within those broader blood cancers. And they are measured in the lives saved. And one of the great privileges of my role is meeting the people who benefited from medicines which they could otherwise have never accessed. On budget night, we announced Lynparza, which would otherwise have cost $140,000 for 300 patients with ovarian cancer, Avastin and Tecentriq for liver cancer, which will help over 500 patients and would have cost $170,000. And then, of course, there is CAR-T and this breakthrough new treatment, part of a national approach to cellular immunotherapy, bringing forward through the agreement with the states treatments that might have cost more than $500,000. And we brought these forward as quickly as possible. And I hear from Peter McCallum or elsewhere in Australia the stories of young lives saved that would otherwise never have had a chance. And that's your work and your doing. So all of this brings me to the future. And so as we look forward, we have the Vision 2030 report, building on Australia's Cancer Futures Framework. And I want to thank the National Oncology Alliance and Rare Cancers Australia. And the report has been widely consulted. Numerous online fora. Obviously, you would have preferred to have done it in person as we would today. But all of these things come together. And over 1,200 stakeholders consulted in the development of the report. The 6 pillars, which I warmly endorse and embrace, in particular, that vision of genomic sequencing being available to all Australians facing cancer and more broadly, other conditions over the course of the next decade. To do what we've done with telehealth, where we brought forward a decade's plan and made that available. That says to me we can do this and we're going to do this. So in terms of the report, the action that I've taken is that I've referred it already to Professor Dorothy Keefe, the head of Cancer Australia. Dorothy will convene a Ministerial Round Table next in early next year, in person where possible, if not in a format such as this, which allows everybody to join. And so I want to thank and acknowledge everybody associated in the development of the report, and I am delighted, Sophie, I see you on stage, which is, I think, my cue, to officially launch the National Oncology Alliance and Rare Cancers Australia's Vision 2030 report, building on Australia's Cancer Future Framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. We really appreciate your support and time here this morning.